Let me share the moment when I discovered my wife, Samantha, was cheating on me. Yeah, I know, it's one of those tales that feels like it could never happen to you until it actually does. We had spent over 10 years together, nearly a decade married, and I honestly believed we were rock solid. Sure, like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but I never expected this. And that's the kicker, right? You never see it coming. It all began one evening when my best friend, Ryan, unexpectedly reached out to me. He suggested we grab a drink, which wasn't unusual for us, but there was an odd tone in his voice that raised my suspicions. Ryan and I have known each other forever, so I can read him pretty well. We met up at a quiet little bar, and after some light chatter and a couple of drinks, he finally dropped the bombshell. "I need to tell you something, man, and you're not going to like it," he confessed, staring into his beer as if it held the answers to life. I braced myself for impact. At first, he hesitated, seemingly reluctant to be the one to shatter my world, but he pushed through. He told me he had spotted Samantha at a restaurant. Nothing alarming, right? But she wasn't by herself. No, she was with another guy, and Ryan was certain it didn't look innocent. Then he hit me with the worst part. He saw them kissing. And it wasn't a quick, friendly peck like you might see among pals. No, this was different. He knew it, and I could sense it in the way he delivered the news. This was bad. I can't even begin to express how I felt in that moment. It was like someone had taken a baseball bat to my chest. My first reaction was to deny it, to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding, that there was no way Samantha would betray me like that. But simultaneously, I felt this pit forming in my stomach. Part of me realized Ryan wasn't lying or exaggerating. He wouldn't do that to me. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal. How could this be happening? Samantha and I had built a life together, and she was out there kissing some random guy behind my back. How long had this been going on? Was this a one-time lapse in judgment, or had I been blissfully ignorant for far too long? I couldn't help but replay every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks, trying to pinpoint any signs I might have missed. Every smile, every kiss, every late arrival home or moment of distance started to feel like pieces of a puzzle that I hadn't been clever enough to assemble. But I'm not one to act rashly without thinking things through. My first instinct wasn't to confront her, not immediately at least. No, I wanted to bide my time, let it simmer. I figured the best approach was to be strategic. If I was going to blow up my marriage, I wanted to ensure I came out ahead. Revenge fantasies began swirling in my mind almost instantly. I wasn't going to let her off the hook easily. But, man, I had no idea how to make her pay in a way that would feel even remotely satisfying. The days that followed were absolute torture. I had to pretend everything was normal while I was crumbling inside. Every time she smiled at me, I felt nauseous. I couldn't look at her without envisioning her with that guy. And she was completely oblivious to the fact that I knew. She continued living her life as if nothing had changed, as if she weren't lying to my face every single day. But the worst part? I still loved her, or at least I thought I did. Sure, I was furious, but there was a part of me that just couldn't accept she could really do this. I kept telling myself maybe Ryan was mistaken. Maybe he misinterpreted the whole situation. But deep down, I knew the truth. Then, about a week later, Samantha dropped a bombshell of her own. During dinner, just the two of us, she unexpectedly started discussing open relationships. I nearly choked on my food. I mean, we'd been married for a decade, and she chooses this moment to bring it up? Initially, I thought she was joking or trying to be provocative, but nope, she was dead serious. She launched into a speech about how modern couples were exploring open marriages and how it could be refreshing for us. Refreshing? The woman was out there sleeping around behind my back, and now she wanted my blessing to continue? The nerve! It hit me like a ton of bricks. This was her way of covering her tracks. She wasn't satisfied with just one guy. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. And she must have thought I was either too naive or too weak to object. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. She was trying to manipulate me, twisting everything so her affair didn't seem like cheating anymore. It was brilliant in a twisted sort of way. Instead of admitting to what she'd been doing, she wanted to repackage it as something progressive. What a joke. I wanted to explode. I wanted to stand up, flip the table, and confront her with the truth. But I didn't. I swallowed my rage, kept my expression as neutral as possible, and agreed with her. That's right, I told her it was a good idea. I could see the surprise flicker across her face for just a moment, but she quickly composed herself and smiled like she had just hit the jackpot. In that instant, I knew exactly what I was going to do. You see, by going along with her ridiculous open relationship concept, I had bought myself precious time. Time to devise a scheme that would utterly shatter her. This wasn't just about settling the score. I wanted her to feel every ounce of agony she had inflicted on me. And believe me, I had some plans in mind, but that's a story for later. For now, my job was to act like everything was perfectly fine while quietly laying the groundwork for my ultimate revenge. She had no clue what was about to hit her. In her mind, she thought she had outsmarted me, that she held the reins. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Samantha always think they're the sharpest tool in the shed, until they're not. After agreeing to Samantha's absurd notion of an open relationship, I felt I had the upper hand, and time was on my side. The question wasn't if I would get my revenge, but how. Samantha had no inkling of what lay ahead. It wasn't enough just to catch her cheating and end things. I wanted her to experience the same betrayal she had so casually thrown my way. That's when I decided to involve Sarah. Sarah and Samantha had been inseparable for years. You know, the kind of friendship where everything is shared. I mean, the sort of bond where you can't have a conversation with your wife without her relaying every single detail to Sarah afterward. But here's the twist. Samantha hadn't confided in Sarah about her little affair. I assumed it was probably due to shame, or maybe she just didn't want to admit that she was doing the very thing she once deemed disgusting when it happened to one of their friends. Regardless of the reason, this divide between them was a gift for me, and I planned to exploit it. I knew that if I played my cards right, Sarah could be my entry point and potentially deliver the final blow to Samantha. So, I set up a meeting with Sarah for coffee, spinning some fabricated story about wanting to discuss Samantha's proposal for an open relationship. Sarah didn't hesitate to agree. I think part of her was genuinely curious, maybe even a bit protective of her friend. She probably imagined she'd be playing therapist, helping me open my mind to the idea of letting my wife fool around with other guys. Yeah, no thanks. We met at this cozy cafe, the kind that feels intimate without being too loud. Perfect for my plan. As we settled in and ordered our drinks, I could see Sarah was eager to dive into the discussion. I kept things light at first, asking about her and Samantha, pretending I was fully on board with this new arrangement. Then, I casually brought up Samantha's suggestion of sexual exploration, framing it as a way to spice things up in our marriage. I won't lie, I said, leaning back in my chair with a sigh. This whole open relationship thing isn't something I ever imagined discussing. But I suppose, in a way, Samantha might be onto something. Maybe it's time to try something different. Sarah's eyes widened. She was intrigued. You could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to wrap her head around this new side of me she'd never witnessed before. Well, I mean, yeah, Samantha has mentioned that she believes couples who experiment are healthier in the long run, Sarah said, sipping her latte. She really thinks this could be refreshing. Exactly, I replied, nodding like I was some progressive husband embracing this radical new lifestyle. I could feel the air shift as the tension started to dissipate. She was warming to the idea, and I sensed it was my moment. Actually, Samantha had a thought, I continued, lowering my voice for effect. She suggested, since we're friends, that maybe you and I could, explore something together. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. For a brief second, she appeared torn between horror and intrigue. The thought of crossing that boundary clearly hadn't crossed her mind until now. Wait, what? She asked, attempting to laugh it off, but I could see curiosity dancing in her eyes. You're telling me Samantha suggested that you and I? Yeah, I said, leaning in closer. Look, I know this sounds wild, but that's the essence of an open relationship, right? Trying new things with people you trust. I was laying it on thick and I knew it, but Sarah was already nibbling at the bait. I could see her trying to rationalize it to herself, just as I had anticipated. It was the thrill of doing something forbidden that made her hesitant, not the idea itself. First, she wavered. I don't know, Derek. I don't think Samantha would be okay with it, she replied, biting her lip as her fingers nervously toyed with the edge of her coffee cup. Classic Sarah. Always striving to do the right thing but unable to resist a little danger when it's presented. Trust me, I reassured her, maintaining a confident tone. Samantha suggested this. She wants us to explore together, and she thought you and I, given our closeness, would be a good starting point. I could see Sarah's defenses starting to crumble. She was curious, tempted. She just didn't want it to feel awkward, you know? That's why I'm bringing it up casually like this. Maybe a part of her thought this was too strange, but I was betting on another part, the one that secretly relished the idea of stepping into the forbidden. Let's be honest. This wasn't merely about me. It was about the thrill, the excitement, the rush of crossing a line she never imagined she'd approach. I knew that was the true motivator here. We sat there for what felt like ages, Sarah's mind clearly racing, and then I made my move. I shifted the conversation from theory to reality. Come on, Sarah. Haven't you ever wondered what it might be like? Just once? No strings attached, no pressure. Samantha wouldn't even need to know. I could see the turmoil in her eyes, the battle between what was right and what was tantalizing. After a few more drinks and some playful banter, she finally cracked. Maybe just once, she whispered, almost incredulous that she was actually saying it. That's when I knew I had her. And with her, I had the perfect weapon to bring Samantha down. The game was officially on. What Sarah didn't realize was that she had just unwittingly signed up for a front row seat to the biggest disaster of her life. The best part? Samantha had no idea her best friend was about to become an essential player in my revenge scheme. I could already envision the fallout, the shattering of their friendship and the double betrayal that would hit her even harder than it had hit me. I flashed a smile at Sarah, thanked her for the conversation, and left the cafe, fully aware that I had just set the stage for my next move. Samantha thought she was clever, pulling the strings while I danced to her tune. But she was about to learn a brutal lesson about what happens when you push someone past their breaking point. With Sarah on board and the stage set for Samantha's ultimate betrayal, it was time to tackle the other half of this twisted equation, her lover. I wasn't going to let him escape unscathed. He needed to feel the weight of the chaos he had helped create. He probably thought he was clever, sneaking around with another man's wife, fully believing he'd never be found out. But he was about to learn the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong husband. I looped Ryan back into the plan. He had already shown he was ready for anything, and this next step required some careful maneuvering. Ryan had useful connections, people who could dig up dirt others couldn't uncover. At this point, I didn't even know the guy's name, but with a few calls, Ryan managed to track him down. We gathered just enough intel to set my next plan in motion. We arranged a meeting, disguising it as a friendly catch-up. The guy had no clue what he was walking into. Ryan framed it as a casual get-together, nothing suspicious, just two guys enjoying a drink. When we arrived at the bar, I immediately sized him up. He was nothing remarkable, tall, fit, and sporting that typical smug expression that screamed arrogance. I could understand why Samantha was drawn to him. He had that polished, charming demeanor, but I could tell he was the type who would fold under real pressure. And that was precisely my intention. After exchanging pleasantries and ordering drinks, I leaned back, allowing Ryan to take the lead. Throughout the interaction, I maintained my composure. The last thing I wanted was to give him any hints. It wasn't the time for confrontation, not yet. First, we needed to ensure he understood the precariousness of the situation. Ryan, ever smooth, began to drop subtle hints. He didn't outright accuse the guy but danced around the topic, bringing up casual details that only someone in the know would catch. He mentioned specific dates, casually referring to a restaurant where Samantha and this guy had been seen together. I could see the guy's body language shift, the tension creeping in as it dawned on him that we weren't there just to grab a beer. At one point, I noticed him glancing at his phone, likely checking for messages from Samantha or itching to bolt. That's when I leaned forward, locking eyes with him for the first time. "You know," I said, my voice steady yet heavy with implication. "We've got this strange situation brewing. Seems like my wife has been a bit too friendly with someone lately." His complexion paled, and I could tell he grasped the gravity of what I was saying. But before he could stammer a denial, I pressed on. "Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to stir the pot. That's not really my style." I paused for dramatic effect, letting my words linger. "But there's something you need to know. I'm aware of an upcoming date you have planned with her. A little rendezvous that is no longer happening." He blinked, clearly taken aback. "What are you talking about?" he blurted, attempting to feign ignorance. But the crack in his voice betrayed him. He was anxious, and he had every reason to be. Ryan seized the moment, leaning back casually but with a serious edge. "We're not asking," he said firmly. "We're telling you. You need to cancel that date and stop answering her calls. If you don't, things are going to get uncomfortable for you. And trust me, you don't want that." The guy fumbled for his drink, struggling to mask the fact that his hands were shaking. It was almost laughable how quickly his cocky demeanor evaporated. He could sense we weren't joking around, that this wasn't just idle banter. I knew he was weighing his options, but the reality was he didn't have any. His only choice was to back off and pray I didn't take this any further. For a few tense moments, he sat there in silence, frozen with that classic deer-in-the-headlights expression. Finally, he nodded, mumbling, "Yeah. All right. I won't show up. I won't answer her anymore." I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just scared of me and Ryan. He was beginning to grasp the depth of the mess he had stumbled into. He had no clue what else I had planned, and the anxiety of the unknown was gnawing at him. Perfect. With that confirmation, Ryan and I exchanged a quick glance. We'd achieved what we set out to do, and I knew I had taken the first significant step toward dismantling Samantha's little fantasy world. The guy bolted from the bar, nearly tripping over himself as he left. Watching him go, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. Samantha had no idea about the tempest brewing just for her. I could already picture her sitting alone, waiting for this guy to arrive, completely oblivious that her perfect little affair was crumbling before her eyes. As we finished our drinks, Ryan chuckled. "Man, did you see his face? He looked like he was about to lose it." I laughed along, but a heavy weight still lingered in my chest. This wasn't over. Sure, confronting the guy was gratifying, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. Samantha wasn't going to slip away from this so easily. This was only the beginning. During the drive home, I couldn't stop mulling over what was next. The revenge, the destruction of her trust, all the meticulous plans I had set in motion. It felt tantalizingly close, yet still distant. But knowing that Samantha's lover had been scared off was a small victory. She was about to face an entirely new level of frustration, and I was going to relish every moment of it. Now that the guy was out of the picture, it was time to turn up the heat on Samantha. I could already envision her sitting there, confused and frustrated, wondering why her lover hadn't shown. Maybe she'd begin to doubt him or even question herself. The irony was almost too sweet to bear. But this was only the beginning of her troubles. What lay ahead would tear her world apart, piece by piece. And I wasn't going to just sit back and watch. I planned to be right in the thick of it, ensuring that every moment of her downfall stung as much as possible. I'll never forget the night everything finally came crashing down. It was the culmination of weeks of anticipation, and to be honest, I hadn't felt this excited about anything in a long time. Samantha, blissfully unaware of the storm I was about to unleash, had headed out for her date, convinced that everything was just business as usual. She thought she was heading off for another evening with her lover, likely reveling in the idea that she was playing me for a fool, pretending that her charade of an open relationship was something I'd actually accepted. What she didn't know was that her boy toy wasn't going to show up. He was probably too busy trying to calm his nerves after our little chat. Meanwhile, I had my own plans for the night, and they didn't involve sulking at home while she cheated on me. Nope. I was done being the oblivious husband. I had set the scene perfectly. After sending Samantha off with a half-hearted kiss and a feigned smile, I called Sarah over. She arrived, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. She thought we were going to indulge in some fun under the pretense of this new open relationship idea Samantha had introduced. I could tell Sarah was still a bit hesitant about the whole concept, but that uncertainty quickly melted away as the wine started to flow. I ensured the ambience was just right. Candles flickered, soft music played in the background. It was romantic, intimate, and all the things Samantha probably thought she had exclusive rights to in our marriage. But tonight, those elements belonged to me and Sarah. We chatted, laughed, and drank a bit more wine, and soon enough the conversation shifted to more personal topics. The tension in the air was palpable. I could sense that Sarah was just waiting for me to make the first move, and so I did. Things escalated rapidly. One moment, we were casually lounging on the couch, discussing trivial matters, and the next, we were tearing into each other like teenagers at a house party. Clothes came off, inhibitions vanished, and we found ourselves in bed, enveloped in a kind of passion that was more about revenge than desire. This wasn't about Sarah. It never was. It was about Samantha, about taking something away from her, about letting her know she wasn't the only one who could play dirty. And wouldn't you know it, right in the heat of the moment, the front door swung open. Samantha came home earlier than expected, likely because her little romantic evening with her lover had fizzled out. I heard the door click, followed by the sound of her heels echoing on the hardwood floor. The amusing thing was, I wasn't even remotely anxious. There was no rush to cover anything up, no shame, no guilt. I wanted her to see this. I wanted her to walk in on me, to feel the same betrayal I had been drowning in for weeks. And then it happened. The bedroom door swung wide open, and there stood Samantha, her expression morphing into a mix of shock, revulsion, and unfiltered rage. Her mouth dropped open, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She probably never imagined I would be capable of something like this. But there I was, in bed with her best friend. "What the hell is going on?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the room. Caught completely off guard, Sarah scrambled out of the bed, yanking on her clothes in a frantic attempt to cover herself. She looked like a deer in headlights, utterly unsure of how to react. "Samantha, I didn't mean for this to happen," she stammered, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't even bear to meet Samantha's furious gaze. Without waiting for a reply, Sarah bolted from the room, probably fleeing for her life, leaving me and Samantha to face off like two dueling gunslingers in an old western. As the door slammed shut behind her, a thick silence enveloped us, hanging heavy in the air, like the calm before a fierce storm. And then the storm hit. "You repulsive piece of shit," Samantha shouted, advancing on me with her fists clenched. I could see the fury igniting in her eyes, the very fire I once cherished, now aimed directly at me. "You slept with my best friend? In our bed? How dare you? You hypocritical bastard." I couldn't help but let out a laugh. The irony of her outrage was almost comical. Here she stood, acting as though she had the moral high ground, all while she had been sneaking around behind my back. I climbed out of bed, not even bothering to cover myself. I wanted her to feel every bit of this moment. "Hypocrite? Are you really serious, Samantha?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been hooking up with some guy for weeks, and you think I'm the bad guy here? That's different," she screamed, her face contorting in anger. "We agreed to an open relationship, Derek. You crossed a line. Sarah's my best friend." I couldn't suppress the laughter that bubbled up inside me. The absurdity of the situation was almost overwhelming. "An open relationship?" I scoffed. "That's rich coming from you. Don't even try to play the victim, Samantha. I'm well aware of your affair. I've known for weeks. Did you really think I was oblivious? Did you think I was blind to your deceit?" Her complexion drained for a moment, and I could see the realization wash over her. She was being played this entire time. "Wait, what?" she muttered, her voice suddenly small and vulnerable. You knew all along? Of course I fucking knew, I snapped, stepping closer, my anger finally boiling over. I knew the moment Ryan saw you with that guy. I knew when you came home smelling like him. And then you had the audacity to propose this ridiculous open relationship nonsense, expecting me to fall for it. You've been lying to me this whole time, and now you want to act like I crossed a line. Samantha's expression twisted with rage again, but this time, I saw something else in her eyes, fear. She had lost control of the situation, and she realized it. You bastard, she spat, her voice trembling. You orchestrated this whole thing, didn't you? I nodded, not even bothering to hide the satisfaction in my voice. You're damn right I did. You think you can cheat on me, treat me like a fool, and just walk away? No way. This is your mess, Samantha. You created this disaster, and now you're going to lie in it. Alone. Her expression crumpled, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of vulnerability. But it was too late for tears or apologies. We had crossed an irreversible line. She let out one last scream of pure frustration before storming out of the room, slamming the door with such force that the walls rattled. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing and my thoughts swirling. This should have felt like triumph, like I had finally claimed what I wanted. But in that moment, all I felt was a profound emptiness. Sure, I had my revenge, but at what cost? The cost was my marriage, my life as I had known it. I had incinerated it all, leaving behind nothing but ashes. After the storm of our confrontation had settled, I knew what needed to happen next. There was no rebuilding this, no salvaging what remained. Everything between Samantha and me was shattered beyond repair. So, while she was still reeling from the shock of finding me with Sarah, I calmly spoke the words she probably never expected to hear. I'm filing for divorce. I anticipated another outburst, screams, throwing things, anything to regain some semblance of control over the situation. But for the first time that night, Samantha just stood there, frozen in disbelief. It must not have dawned on her that I might actually walk away. She likely thought I would be the one begging for forgiveness, trying to fix things. But no, the moment she chose betrayal, our marriage was finished. I had simply been waiting for the right moment to make my move. You can't be serious, she finally said, her voice shaky but desperate. Derek, come on, don't be like this. We can work through this. The open relationship was supposed to help us, not ruin everything. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. She still didn't understand, still couldn't see that the open relationship nonsense was never going to resolve anything. It was merely her way of justifying her lies, attempting to paint her affair as something progressive when, in truth, it was nothing but selfishness disguised as a trendy concept. Help us? Samantha, let's stop pretending, okay? You didn't want an open relationship to improve our marriage. You wanted it to keep sleeping around and feel good about yourself while doing it. You thought I'd be foolish enough to buy into your little charade. But the truth is, I've known for weeks about you and your lover. Hell, even Ryan was aware. Her eyes went wide, and for a fleeting moment, I saw real fear flash across her face. She finally understood that this wasn't just me reacting in anger. I had been patiently waiting, quietly observing, and plotting my next move. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. Don't even attempt to spin this as some noble effort to spice things up in our marriage, I said, shaking my head. You lied to me, cheated behind my back, and then, when you got caught, tried to twist it into something for our benefit. It's pathetic, Samantha. And now it's over. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. I made a mistake, okay? We both made mistakes, but we can fix this. I can fix this. We don't have to throw everything away. I felt my anger flare up again, but I pushed it back down. I had been angry for too long. Now was the time to put an end to this once and for all. There's nothing left to fix, I replied coolly. I don't trust you anymore, and without trust, there is no marriage. I'm done. In that moment, Samantha broke down. She cried, begged, and tried to justify her actions, claiming she felt trapped in our marriage, that the affair had been her attempt to regain some sense of excitement in her life. But none of it mattered. Each word she uttered felt empty, like tired excuses I'd heard countless times from others. It felt almost scripted, as if she were reading lines from a play designed to manipulate me into staying. But I wasn't playing along. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the bed, and started packing my belongings. It felt surreal, like I was watching myself on autopilot as I folded shirts into a suitcase. There was no more shouting, no more fighting. It was finished. The thrill of revenge had been satisfying at the moment, but now that the dust was settling, all I felt was a profound emptiness. I cut off all communication with both Samantha and Sarah. I had no desire to hear more apologies, excuses, or explanations. As far as I was concerned, they were both out of my life for good. Samantha, for obvious reasons, and Sarah, well, she had played her role in this debacle too. She might have been swept into it by my manipulation, but that didn't matter. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The divorce process was brutal yet swift. Samantha initially fought it, but when she realized that nothing could salvage our relationship, she relented. We divided our assets evenly. I didn't care about the house or the money. I just wanted to be free. Every conversation with her lawyer felt like I was peeling away layers of my former life, shedding pieces until only the bare skeleton of who I used to be remained. Finally, we signed the papers, and just like that, it was over. You'd think I would have felt a sense of triumph, right? I had executed my plan, taken my revenge, and exposed her for the liar she was, all while walking away without looking back. But the truth was, when it was all said and done, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. All that anger and resentment I had been carrying around had burned away, leaving behind a hollow space within me. The revenge had been satisfying, but it didn't fill the void her betrayal had created. It didn't erase the pain or the sense of loss. I came to realize that revenge wasn't the answer. Sure, it felt gratifying in the heat of the moment, but it didn't restore the years we had shared, nor did it bring back the trust that had been shattered. That was gone, and nothing I did could ever revive it. In the days that followed, I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on everything, the marriage, how it had deteriorated, and how I had allowed myself to reach this point. I used to love Samantha, and perhaps a part of me still did, but that love had been twisted by all the lies and deceit. I wasn't the same man I had been when we first got married, and she was no longer the woman I had fallen in love with. Standing on the other side of this chaos, I understood that the only way forward was to let go, not just of her, but of everything. The anger, the pain, the bitterness. It wasn't helping me anymore. It was just a burden I carried, dragging me down, and I needed to release it if I was ever going to move on. So I did. I walked away from that chapter of my life, leaving Samantha and all the emotional baggage behind. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't clean, but it was necessary. I had taken back control of my life, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of freedom. Yet even then, the question lingered. Was it all worth it? I suppose that's something I'll be grappling with for the rest of my life. After the dust settled and the divorce papers were signed, I found myself sitting across from Ryan at a bar, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few months. We clinked our beers together, laughing at how absurd everything seemed now that it was over. Ryan couldn't get over how I had pulled it off, how I had orchestrated the entire saga with such precision. He kept shaking his head, incredulous, saying, "Man, I can't believe you actually did it. You made her pay." I chuckled, though it felt somewhat hollow. Sure, there was a sense of satisfaction in what had unfolded. Samantha had finally faced the consequences of her actions. But the reality was that the revenge plot hadn't left me feeling as triumphant as I had imagined. It wasn't the glorious victory I had envisioned. Still, we laughed about the absurdity of it all, as if we were recounting a bizarre story that had happened to someone else. "What's next for you?" Ryan asked, leaning back in his chair, watching me with keen interest. That question lingered in the air, and for the first time I realized I didn't have a solid answer. I had poured so much energy into uncovering Samantha's lies and seeking revenge that I hadn't taken the time to think about my own future. One thing was crystal clear. I wasn't about to dive into another relationship anytime soon. The mere thought of getting involved with anyone after everything I'd been through, it made my skin crawl. I think it's just going to be me for a while, I replied, taking a sip of my beer. No relationships, no drama. I need to figure things out on my own. Ryan nodded in understanding. That makes sense. After everything you've been through, you deserve a little peace. That word, peace, resonated deeply with me. For the first time in what felt like ages, I was free from the weight of someone else's deceit and chaos. I could finally focus on myself, and honestly, it felt liberating. I didn't need to seek happiness through someone else. I needed to find it within myself. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work. My career became my primary focus, my distraction, and it was exactly what I needed. I started going to the gym regularly, rediscovered hobbies I hadn't touched in years, and began the journey of rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. It was strange to realize how much of my identity had been intertwined with Samantha and the life we had built. Now, with her gone, it felt like I was being given a fresh start. The idea of starting a new relationship didn't even cross my mind. I had zero interest. Betrayal leaves deep scars, and I wasn't ready to allow anyone to come close enough to hurt me again. Trust had become a fragile concept, especially after what Samantha had done, and I had no desire to rush into rebuilding it. For the first time in a long time, I felt content being by myself. Ryan and I stayed close, of course. We'd meet up and joke about the whole situation, but there was an unspoken understanding that I had changed. The man who once trusted and loved so freely was gone. In his place was someone more cautious, more guarded. And while that might sound sad, it wasn't. It felt like self-preservation. I was finally protecting myself from the pain Samantha had caused. As for Samantha, she gradually faded from my life. Once the divorce was finalized, I cut off all communication. No texts, no calls, nothing. In my mind, she had become just a chapter one had closed for good. I didn't care what she was up to, and I certainly didn't want to hear from her again. The same applied to Sarah. She had played her part in this drama, and while I had manipulated her into it, I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. I was ready to leave that whole mess behind. The truth is, while revenge felt sweet in the moment, it didn't fill the emptiness that Samantha's betrayal had left behind. It didn't heal the wounds or restore the trust we had once shared. It merely brought closure, an end to a situation that had dragged on for far too long. And though it hadn't provided the triumphant feeling I expected, it was necessary. In the weeks that followed, I found solace in the stillness of my life. I rediscovered joy in the mundane things I had once overlooked: going to work, hitting the gym, playing guitar, running. These activities began to rebuild my sense of self piece by piece. I realized I didn't need Samantha or anyone else to define who I was. I was learning to find contentment within myself. That's the lesson I took from this whole experience. Betrayal, trust, revenge. It's all a tangled, painful web, but in the end, it taught me something valuable. I didn't need another person to complete me. I didn't need to rebuild what had been shattered. All I needed to do was move forward, focus on my own life, and find inner peace. And for the first time in a long time, I finally had that peace. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more chaos. Just me, my work, and my life. And that, to me, felt like more than enough. Yet, even then, the lingering question remained: was it all worth it? I suppose that's a riddle I'll be grappling with for the rest of my days. After everything settled and the divorce papers were signed, I found myself sitting across from Ryan at a bar, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few months. We clinked our beers together, laughing at how surreal it all seemed now that it was over. Ryan couldn't get over how I had managed to pull it all off, how I had orchestrated the entire saga with such finesse. He kept shaking his head in disbelief, saying, "Man, I can't believe you actually went through with it. You made her pay."